right next to Blue Owl, and I'm sure she'll talk a little bit about that, and that tends to be a favorite. She was Restaurateur of the Year for 1997 in Greater St. Louis. She's the Distinguished Women's Restaurateur in 97. She's been president of the Greater St. Louis Restaurant Association in 2009 and chairman of the board for 2010. She has a whole bunch of other awards here that she probably deserves, but I'll let her tell you a little about those. But most proud, she is the mother of 2 daughters and 2 sons and 5 grandchildren, and as it says here, whom I adore. So that, I think, gets us a lot from Mary right there. So without any further ado, here's Mary.
Okay, let's see. I'll make sure everybody can hear me. Okay. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for the introduction, and I am honored to be here before all of you today. I just feel really blessed that I even have an opportunity like this in my life to share the story of the Blue Owl and how it actually all started, to share the story of my life and how absolutely wonderful and awesome God has been to me. He's taken me by the hand and He's led the way each and every time. And I've prayed throughout the years that He will continue to do so. But I was born and raised in Texas, Galveston, Texas, and I was a BOI, born on the island, sand between my toes. And my mom and dad still reside there. They're both going to be 85 years old this year. And I grew up in the most wonderful, wonderful family. Just truly wonderful family life, and I see so many of you that I know. I'm so happy to see you all here and have you here today. But I grew up in a really wonderful family life. My parents put all of their strength into the fact that we would always have family together for our meals. We would always always go to church. We would always make sure that we said our prayers at night, and we would have a Catholic education. And we were considered back then actually to be a very poor family. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. There were 5 children. I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. I'm the second. And my dad worked for the Cotton Concentration Company down in Galveston. He was a clerk there. And so anyway, we loved being together as a family at the dinner table, and my mom would make everything from scratch. She couldn't afford to take us, they couldn't afford to take us out to dinner, and they couldn't afford to buy things that were already made, and so she made everything from scratch. And my grandma, Selma Hinkle Roadfuchs, who lived around the corner from us, she came from Germany, could you tell? But she was a wonderful cook and a wonderful baker. My grandfather, who I never got to know, Albrecht Roadfuchs, he was the head pastry chef in Galveston, Texas. He also came from Germany, and he was the head pastry chef at the Galvez Hotel, and then he also worked as the head baker at Boning's Bakery. So there's a lot of history there with people who know what they're doing when it comes to baking. And as a child, I grew up at my grandma's kitchen table just watching everything that she did. She'd make the homemade coffee cakes, the German coffee cake streusels that were just the most gorgeous things. And I haven't seen anything like it actually since she passed away in 1969. But she would also make cinnamon rolls. And Father Green was the priest at our parish. And Father Green loved Selma because Selma always brought Father Green that pan of homemade cinnamon rolls. And what did Father Green do with those? He took them straight to his room and hid them under his bed. He did not share them with anyone. Those were his cinnamon rolls. And in order to thank Selma, Father Green would come knocking at her door. And I remember I was there one day when he came knocking at the door. And he had for Selma, he was a fisherman. He loved to go fishing. And he had gone out into the Gulf of Mexico. And he caught a redfish this tall, about that big. And it was for Selma. He walked it up her stairs and had it standing right there for her. Selma, look what I have for you. And her eyes were as big as saucers, and she's like, oh my goodness. So my mom had this great big barbecue pit, one of those big Texas pits that was a barrel. And she took that fish. The only thing she knew to do with it was to take that whole fish and put it on that barrel barbecue pit, and she smoked the whole thing. And we ate fish for weeks. But I grew up at Grandma's table just watching, just like this, everything she did. And my mom, she wasn't the mom that said, you know, get out of the kitchen, I'm busy, I need to get this done. She was the one that said, come on in and I'll show you how to do it and help me do it. And to this day, I just called her the other day on, we were making something at the restaurant. I wasn't quite sure how to put the extracts in, and I said, Mom, how would you do that? And she said, 2 teaspoons of vanilla and a teaspoon of almond. I said, okay. I got off the phone, I went back to the bakery, and I said, this is what you do. So, I mean, 85 and as sharp as she can be, still loves to cook and bake, and not a day goes by that she doesn't cook my dad dinner. Just got out of the hospital, she did the night before last, and when I called her yesterday afternoon to see how she was feeling, she had just cooked my dad's dinner, sitting in her chair, in her computer chair, and he got her everything out. But, you know, I mean, she's a wonderful cook and baker, and my dad's just absolutely awesome. I was thinking the other day, you know, how would I say it? And I said, you know, I would thank my dad probably for my faith, because my dad has instilled my faith ever since I was a little bitty girl. We would always go to church, and my dad still prays the rosary every night and keeps us all in his prayers. He says there needs to be more decades to the rosary for all the people he has to pray for. But they're just wonderful people, and they put the emphasis on the family, that we all stay together. So as I grew up, I was going to high school, and I started working for Southwestern Bell when I was 15 years old. I was a freshman in high school, 15 years old, and I got hired to be a cord board operator. They taught me the cord board, and I went to school, high school, and then I would also work in the evening from 4 to 8 or 5 to 9 on my evening shift, and on the weekends I would have to work 1 to 10. But talk about a good job back in 1969 for a 15-year-old making $5 an hour. I was making a lot of money, you know, and so I went to work for Bell, and I met my high school sweetheart, and we went through high school together. He was a year ahead of me, and he went on to graduate. He went on to college, and when he went to college, he went to the University of Texas in Austin. Well, I was a year behind him, so when I graduated, I got a presidential scholarship to go to school. I went to the community college there in Galveston on scholarship for a year, and after that year, since he was away, we decided that we really wanted to get married. I was 19 and he was 20. And we thought, you know, this is truly what we wanted, and in my heart, I knew that I was doing the right thing. There was no doubt in my mind that I was totally in love and that we were going to be together for the rest of our life. So we got married and we moved to Austin, and I continued working for Bell. I put him through school. When he graduated 2 years later, he had a history degree and he couldn't find a job. And I was always considered to be a management candidate for Bell, but they couldn't ever move me into management because I didn't have the college degree. Well, when he needed a job, I went to my boss and I said, is there any way you could pull his application? He's applied with Bell, he's gone through the testing, is there any way you could pull his application? And sure enough, within 2 weeks, he was hired. And he became a clerk, just like I was at that time. And he was in a clerical position, but because he had a college degree, within 2 months, he was moved into management. So we were in Austin then, and we got moved to Waco. And then my daughter, my first daughter, Kim, was born in 1977. We moved to San Antonio right after she was born. She was 3 weeks late, and he had to go before me even because she was so overdue. But we moved to San Antonio then, and we were there for a year when they were going to give him another promotion. And they were going to move him to St. Louis for 1 year. We were going to come up here for a year. He was going to get training at 1010 Pine, which I had worked for Bell now for almost 10 years. And it was like the place to be. It was God's place in Bell. When you got to go to 1010 Pine, that was where all of the people were, and it was like God's home. And so here we were going to move to St. Louis. And he was in New Jersey on training, and he called me on the phone and he said, you need to go to St. Louis because we need to find a house. And so I said, okay. So I said, okay. And so I had to make a flight reservation. I had never been on an airplane before. So I had to fly by myself. I had never seen a snowflake. I was from Texas. I had never seen a snowflake. I had never seen a basement. Galveston was built on sand. Okay, we didn't have basements, and I didn't know what it was. I wasn't good in geography, so I didn't know about the arch. So all these things, and here we were moving to St. Louis, and on our move here, I just prayed. I said, dear God, if you're going to take us away from our family and our friends and our home state of Texas, and you know how proud we are, please let this be a good experience. Let us meet people. Let us get to know people and make friends. And God, has He answered my prayers each and every day, as I see so many of you who I definitely consider friends that come into the Blue Owl, into our business all the time. It's just my prayers have been answered over and over again. Well, when we moved to St. Louis, we moved in a subdivision in South County that had 17 children on the block. We lived in a cul-de-sac, and 17 little children, the same age as Kimberly, who was 18 months old at that time. We made such wonderful friends. And, time passed, and we had, wonderful family life and everything. And then in 1983, out of the clear blue, my husband came to me on a Saturday morning, and he said, I'm going to leave. I want a divorce. And I just looked at him. I thought he was kidding. I had no idea that he really was being serious. The word divorce was not anything in my vocabulary. My parents will be married 60 years this coming June. So then I realized he was telling me the truth, that he was serious. And he said he was going to leave. Well, here I was 1,000 miles from home. And I didn't know how I was going to take care of my children because I had given up my college education to be able to support him through school. And I didn't know how I was going to keep the roof overhead. I didn't know how I was going to keep the food on the table. And I just turned to God. And at that time, Kelly, our youngest daughter, had been born in 1981. So I still had a 2-year-old in diapers. And I was like, dear God, what am I going to do? How am I going to function? Tell me what you want me to do with my life. My first thought was to go back home to Texas, not to go to Galveston, but to go back to Texas so I could at least be close enough to family, because not having a penny to my name, I didn't know how I would ever get my children to know what it was like to have cousins and family together at holidays and dinners and things like that. It was just the 3 of us. And so I just really prayed, and then I went to an attorney and I said, I really want to go back to Texas. And they said, well, the first attorney said, you really probably won't get to go back to Texas because as long as your husband is active with your children and he would see them on the weekends, you can't go back to Texas because they're not going to let you leave the state with the kids. So they said, let's fight for more financial support. So I got another attorney, and the same thing happened. I got a 3rd attorney, and the same thing happened. So finally, 3 years went by before we were even divorced. But when we got our divorce, it wasn't a month later that he got a promotion to Washington, D.C. And he came and he said he was leaving. And I was like, you can't do that. But he could. He could leave. Well, I had already started baking out of my home. The way that I thought I could stay home with my girls and I could try to make a living was that I love to cook and I love to bake, and we always like to have company over for dinner. So if I could just do this for people, maybe I could stay home, I could provide my kids with the same home that they had, the same family life, and that I would be home with them. I could still be the Girl Scout leader and the Brownie leader and do the carpool to the Catholic school. And so I decided that I would start baking out of my home. My neighbors encouraged me to do this. They thought it was a wonderful idea because I was the one that was always in charge of the subdivision big wheel parades, that I didn't realize you couldn't just close off the subdivision streets without contacting the police or the emergency equipment. We would just close off the streets and all the kids would decorate their big wheels and wagons and bicycles and tricycles, and they'd go down and we'd have a parade and a chili supper and you name it, we had it. And I was in charge of the lunch with the Easter Bunny. I formed the babysitting co-op in the entire South County area right there in Oakville. So, I mean, I was always busy doing things, having the tea parties, having the company over, and I was always the one they would choose to make the desserts. So they all said, why don't you do this? I think this is a great idea. And my first thought was, why would people pay me to make desserts? Doesn't everybody bake like this? But I found out shortly, no, they don't. And back in 1983, when all of this happened, it was a time when a lot of women were going out into the workforce. It was also a time when the craft fairs were becoming very, very popular. They had just started and they were very popular. So I thought if I could go to the craft shows and the festivals in the St. Louis and Illinois area close by, and I could sell my baked goods, then maybe I could get orders from people and I could build my business that way. So I formed the business called From the Kitchen of Mary, and I started baking out of my home, and I went to my first show in September of 1983, and it was at the Green Tree Festival in Kirkwood. And I set up like a banquet-style table with a lace tablecloth. I had silver platters with the Greek baklava, Hungarian butterhorns, cinnamon nut crescents, Russian tea cakes, pecan tassies, all those things that our moms and our grandmas used to make all the time, but that women didn't have time to make anymore. And so I was selling something that they were missing. And it was all homemade quality, top-notch, and everybody loved it. The prices were extremely reasonable. And my signature item was a pastry tray. It had 12 different kinds of homemade pastries, cookies, and candies on it, with a dish of candied pecans in the center. And so people could turn around and place their orders for that. So I went to my first show, and people bought all of my things, and that was in September of 1983. And by the Christmas of 1984, I had orders for over 30,000 Christmas cookies. So here I am answering my phone in the kitchen, and it's ringing off the wall, and I have this big butcher block paper across the kitchen wall, and it said small, medium, and large, and I would put the name and the size, and I was, like sitting on the kitchen floor crying, going, I can't do this, but I had to do this. So then somebody would call and they would say, you make such wonderful pastries. I bet you make a great fruitcake. And I would go, I can do that. And then they'd say, well, how much do you charge? And I said, I'll call you right back. And so I'd call my mom in Texas, and I knew that my mom made a really good fruitcake. I'd never made one before. But I called my mom and I said, Mom, I need your fruitcake recipe. I knew she had always made a fruitcake because she and my grandma, we knew it was Christmas when their fruitcakes were in the oven. Christmas was around the corner. So she gave me her fruitcake recipe and everything, and I got off the phone and I priced it out, and then I called the woman back and I told her what the price was, and she ordered it. My mom failed to tell me that if it was a 6-pound fruitcake, it would take almost 3 hours to bake in the oven. Well, I didn't have 3 hours because it took me 21 hours a day and 7 days a week to make 30,000 cookies. So I had to call my neighbor Sandy and say, Sandy, can I borrow your oven to bake this fruitcake? And Sandy said, well, of course you can. And so my fruitcake baked in Sandy's oven while I was making cookies. But my neighbors were also so supportive because they would come over in the evening after all their kids were in bed, and my kids were in bed at 10:30 at night. They would have aprons on and rolling pins in hand, and they would roll out all the doughs that I had spent the day making. So I would spend the day making all these different doughs, and then they would help me to roll out all these cookies. Have any of you ever made Hungarian butterhorns? Do you know how much trouble those are? I myself have made over 50,000 of those in my kitchen at home. I mean, and people say, what is your proudest? When do you feel the proudest? And I don't feel proud, believe you me, but I answered that question because I thought about it, and I thought, when I walk in the bakery at the Blue Owl and I see all those women making Hungarian butterhorns, and I know I don't have to do it anymore. That's my proudest moment, But anyway, so I started making all these cookies, and after that Christmas, it was like, okay, God, let's talk about this. I'm not really sure if this is what you have in mind because, my family, 21 hours a day, 7 days a week, I don't think that's what you had in mind. I don't think that's what I had in mind anyway, so let's rethink this. And so I just prayed, and then I saw this thing where you could take a small business course at Melville High School, how to start a small business. So I went to this 6-hour course, and I wanted to move my bakery out of my home into just some small location, and if I could do that, then I could maybe hire 2 or 3 people. We could work together. And I could get some commercial equipment. My ovens at home, I had a regular oven, and I had a very small oven, a little bit bigger than a microwave. So I couldn't even put commercial-sized pans in my ovens at home. And so I said, if I could just get a commercial location somewhere where people could come there and buy the product and everything, then maybe I could make a living on this. And so I started looking for a place, and there was this building in Kimmswick. And Kimmswick was this little historical town, totally off the beaten path. And my first thought was, no, not Kimmswick, because it's way too far out of the way. But someone who had a shop in Kimmswick said to me, she says, you need to meet with Mrs. Ross. She's the lady who has restored Kimmswick, and she has this building that is empty right now. It was a daytime restaurant. It had been a restaurant since 1980. You see, Mrs. Luciana Gladney Ross had come into Kimmswick in the late 50s. But as a child, she came there because her summer home was located in Kimmswick. Her father was an heir to the 7-Up company. So they would come to Kimmswick on the train, and she grew very, very fond, and she grew in love with Kimmswick. So in the later years, in the 50s, she came back to Kimmswick when the highways were built, the riverboats quit coming, and the automobiles became very popular, and the town was bypassed. So the town was very run down when she came back in the 50s, and her heart was broken. And she decided that she had some monies that she could put into a project, and she decided that Kimmswick was her project to do. So she would buy each piece of property one by one. She hired a crew. That crew would restore the property, and then she would lease it to a shop owner. She also took log cabin buildings from Jefferson County in different areas, and she moved them piece by piece and log by log on site in Kimmswick. So the Old House Restaurant, which was very, very popular, was one of those buildings that Ulysses S. Grant had slept in at one time. And also there's the Burgess Howe cabin, there's the regular cabin, the candy cabin that we call it. All of those places were moved into Kimmswick for that historical value and significance. And Mrs. Ross continued to restore each piece of property. Well, the Blue Owl was bought by Mrs. Ross in the 70s, and she restored that into a daytime restaurant because she had already had someone open the nighttime restaurant called the Old House. And it was doing okay, but the daytime restaurant just didn't make it. 4 different owners before I met with Mrs. Ross. Each year it had failed ownership because no one advertised, no one knew about it. There were only 2 or 3 shops in town. And so I met with Mrs. Ross, scared to death. I had a consultant who had taught my 6-hour course at Melville High School, and I said, I went up to him after the course and I said, this is what I do, this is who I am. Do you think it's possible for somebody like me who has no college degree, no culinary professional training experience, I haven't hired anyone, I haven't fired anyone, could I do this? Could I actually open a small business like this, and what do you think? And he said, after talking to you for just a very short time, I think you can do anything you set your mind to do. And that was the confidence that I needed to go forward and to meet with Mrs. Ross. So I asked Mr. Quirk to come with me. He happened to be a restaurant consultant. And I asked him if he would meet with me because I was so intimidated by this woman who had so much money. I was scared to death. So I met with Mrs. Ross at the Blue Owl in May of 1985, and I told her that I had 2 small children, that I had baked out of my home, that I was going through a divorce, still going through the divorce. It took 3 years for no reason other than I was trying to be able to go back closer to home. And so anyway, I said, you know, this is what I'd like to do, is to open a little bakery where people could come after they've shopped at your shops here in town, and they could have dessert and coffee and tea. And she said, well, indeed, I think that's a good idea, but at the same time, I know that someday, even though 4 people have failed, someday Kimmswick is going to need a daytime restaurant. So I want this to remain a daytime restaurant, and you can move your bakery in here, but you have to run it as a daytime restaurant. Can you do that? And I said, I can do that. Okay? Those famous last words. I had my hands crossed because I was praying at the same time. I can do that. And so she said, okay, well, how soon can you do it? And I said, well, I'll try to get it started as soon as I can. And so we talked about it, and we shook hands. There wasn't a written contract, nothing. We just shook hands, and I promised her before I left that day that someday, Mrs. Ross, you will have to wait in line to get into this Blue Owl. And she says, and she was heavy set back then, she starts laughing at me. Ho, 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 honey, you have no idea what you're getting yourself into. And I'm like, ho, 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 you don't either, you know, because I didn't know what I was getting myself into. And so before we left that day, she says, well, would you like to see the kitchen? And I'm like, well, yeah, I guess I should see the kitchen. I didn't even think to ask that question. And so she says, well, let me show you the kitchen. And so I went back behind her, and Neil Quirk went behind me. And I walk in, and there's this concrete gray floor, painted battleship gray. There's this long, narrow countertop that went the length of the kitchen. There was no heating lamps or anything like that. There was a piece of wood up at the top that was a shelf made out of wood, which today they wouldn't allow that with the health department, but and all the spices were up there. And it was built so low that when I would go to shake something on it, I would hit my head. But to me, it was like millions of dollars worth of equipment. And it was there. The tables and chairs were there. She had the old English china there. She had the forks and the knives and everything that I needed to open that business. So I walked in, and the first thing I see is this thing on the end of the table. And I said, well, what's that? And she looked at me. She turned and she looked at me with these big eyes. And Neil elbows me in the side. He goes, I'll do the rest of the talking. And I said, what is it? And it was a commercial can opener. I'd never seen one before. So I was like, oh no, I started sweating bullets then. And she's like, here goes the fifth failure. I just know it, you know. But I promised her before she left she'd have to wait in line. And within 2 months, Mrs. Ross came and there were lines out that building. We opened, I spent the summer trying to figure out what I was going to do and how I was going to do it. Making a menu, and how do you make a menu? I didn't know, but I just wrote down everything that my kids and I love to eat, and that became our menu. I thought if I can't make it and I have to go out of business, at least we'll have food on the table, you know, and that's how we created the first menu. And then I opened on August 23rd of 1985. It was my grandmother's birthday, and it was in her honor and her memory, and I know that she is in heaven today watching over me each and every day and helping me make those decisions and just kind of guiding me along. We opened with 5 employees. We had 50 seats. We now, over 25 years, which is just unbelievable, and it's just something, especially in this hard economical time, and just with gasoline prices the way they are and everything, this is our 25th anniversary, which is just absolutely thrilling to me. I never thought I'd make it a year, much less 25. And we opened with 5 employees, and we now have over 100 people employed. We have not 50 seats, but we have 225 seats at the Blue Owl. And then just in 2008, the neighbors next door, Rich and Gloria Roseman, who owned Abigail's Gift Shop, it was a very popular and well-known and loved gift shop in Kimmswick, came to me and they said, since you've been our neighbor for so long and you've been such a good neighbor, we're going to offer you first choice to buy our building because we're going to retire. We have a home at the lake. We want to spend time with our grandkids, and we want you to buy our building. And I looked at them. I had never even thought they would retire. And I said, thank you very much. Thank you for the compliment, but I tell you what, there's no way I want to work any harder or I want to do any more hours. I don't have any more hours in a day. I just cannot, no thank you. Thank you, but no thank you. And then about 2 weeks went by, and God said, what if the wrong person goes in that building and sets up something that really wouldn't complement the Blue Owl? What if it would be detracting from Kimmswick? What if? All these what ifs. And I called Gloria and Rich up and I said, we need to talk. I said, I really think I need to protect my property and all of my investment that I have here over these past 23 years. And so we sat down and talked, and she said, I want to stay in business until the end of 2008. We can close at the end of the year, and then it's yours. And so then I had to spend the rest of the year thinking, what in the world am I going to do with another building? But when I was a child, my daddy always took us to the Star Dairy in Galveston, Texas. And he loved to take us to the old-fashioned ice cream parlor, and we loved to go. Now, ice cream cones back then were 10 cents. And he would pile us all in the back of the pickup truck, because you could do that then, pile us all in the back of the pickup truck, and we would all go to the Star Dairy, and we would have our ice cream. And after my brother's Little League games, pile all the baseball team, all the team in the back of the pickup truck, and we'd all go to the Star Dairy, and we loved having that ice cream, and wonderful, wonderful memories we have. So I decided that I wanted to make those memories. We always make memories for people having dinner with their families. We always make wonderful memories having those fabulous desserts. Let's expand it a little bit, and let's make those wonderful memories going to an old-fashioned ice cream parlor. And what better place would fit in Kimmswick and in that atmosphere? So we decided to do that. And then the building is like split in two almost. So the other side, we said, what are we going to do with that? And so we decided that what would complement ice cream and be an expansion of our business already with the pies, the cakes, the cheesecakes, and all of the above, the cookies, the pastries, than candy. So we decided that was going to be the old-fashioned candy shop. And then, of course, my daughter, who is now 33, going to be 33 next week, and she is our bakery manager, she was going to run this shop. And she says, well, what about gifts? We have to have gifts. We've always wanted to expand our Blue Owl with gifts and things like that, but we don't have any room. So then retail items became part of the picture. And then in October, after we had opened and it got cold and people quit buying as much ice cream, she said, well, coffee and cappuccino and lattes and espresso and hot chocolates with marshmallow cream inside of it, that'll work. And so then she got all of that added on. So now we have a building called Mary's Sweet Shop right next door to the Blue Owl. And it's just a natural extension. It has a beautiful patio. People can come and they can sit out there and just relax and enjoy, and they can have their ice cream. They can actually order food from the Blue Owl that can be brought over there, and we can also use that as expanded seating on the days when we have the riverboats come to Kimmswick that brings us 300 people for lunch. We can expand our seating over there as well. Some really and truly, when we have those riverboat days, some days we serve 700 people for lunch in a 5-hour period. Believe it or not, we really do. And you know, that first day I opened in August of 1985, I prayed for 30 customers. If I could just have 30 customers come through the door, that would be a miracle. Because I didn't know what it was going to take to make a go of it. I had never had those business courses and all of that. So I prayed for 30, and the first day we had 37. So I knew that God was watching over me. And our greatest day so far has been when we did have expanded hours. It was during a Christmas festival, and we were open from 10 in the morning till 8 at night, and we seated and served 2,500 people. Now that is a lot of people in just a few hours. Our normal hours are 10 to 3 Tuesday through Friday, 10 to 5 Saturday and Sunday. We're closed on Monday. We're only open 5 hours a day during the weekday and 7 hours a day on the weekends. Our average count on a weekday when we're in our busy season is between 400 and 500 people. Our average count on a weekend, on a Saturday and a Sunday, we serve between usually 500 to 900 people, just depending on the weather and all of that. So it's a very busy place, and I can tell you all of those employees are very, very busy. When I left them today, they were buzzing like bees. With Easter just around the corner, and we are closed Easter because everybody needs to be with their family on Easter Sunday. But tomorrow morning we have a breakfast with the Easter Bunny. We have over 200 reservations for that. It starts at 9 o'clock in the morning. So all of the beginnings have to be created for the stuffed French toast, and all the butter cookies have to be decorated, and all of these different things have to be done. They were making the apple pies. The one apple pie I was going to bring was too hot, but it has to be cooled enough that we can actually cut into it. So, you know, what a blessing. My head cook has been with me for 24 years. Her name is Bonnie, and she comes from St. John, and she drives from St. John every day. And my dining room manager has been there for 25 years. Our apple pie lady is Carol. She has made that apple pie, and she's been with me for 20 years. We have about 5 different servers who have been at the Blue Owl for 18 years. And just recently, 2 years ago, we had to hire a server. That was the first time in 2 years that, just last year we hired a server, and it was the first time in 2 years that we had to hire a server, which is almost unheard of in the restaurant industry. But I just have a truly loyal, dedicated staff who believe in that philosophy of bringing everyone into our home, treating them as our guest, providing them with the most wonderful home-cooked meal, the most awesome, fabulous homemade dessert, just making sure that the atmosphere and that their experience is absolutely wonderful, and they can't wait until they go out and bring their families back. Now, I'll tell you just a few minutes, well, maybe, should I wrap it up? Probably. Okay, very soon. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up. Yeah, when I talked last week, as he was saying, I talked last week, and they said, you have about 10 or 15 minutes, and I go, I'm from Texas. I can't even say hello in 10 minutes, you know? But anyway, but you know, I've just been so blessed over all these years. And you know, God just continues to bless me. He definitely talks to me directly. I hear direct messages from him. Sometimes it's not even anything that I have to question. And you just have to be willing to work hard. You have to be willing to let him lead you. You have to be willing to have true faith and confidence that you can do it. I have the most beautiful family. And I have to tell you, because I didn't say this last week, I said, oh my goodness, I left out the best part of my story, is that a month before I opened the Blue Owl, I was at a party. And I met this gentleman, and his name was Jerry Claywell, and we started dating. And we dated for 15 years. Because that was the one thing I could never say I can do that to, was when he asked me to marry him, I always said I can't do that. Because he had 2 boys. They were the same, almost the same age as my 2 girls. And it was going to be 4 teenagers in a household. And it was going to be the Blue Owl, which was like a spoiled, rotten teenager itself, always needing so much attention. And I just knew I couldn't handle that. But he was so patient. And I would tell him, I would say, Jerry, you need to find someone. I said, really, believe me, I've been through this terrible experience, and I just don't think, maybe I'll never do this again. I said, I just can't do this. I said, you really are such a wonderful man. You're such a Christian. You're such a loving person. Anybody would give anything to marry somebody like you. And I'd break up with him and say, please go find someone else, because it's not fair. Because I felt so guilty. And I'd say, don't call me again. And then I'd see him, and my heart would sink. And we'd start dating again, because it was just that love. And yet, I loved my faith, and I wanted my sacraments. And so I was not willing to give that up until my church would allow me to do that. And after his son, Chris, and our son, is 35 now. Andy is 33. Kim will be 33, and Kelly's 29. So Chris and Julie, my daughter-in-law, they have two daughters, so we have 2 granddaughters. They are 4 and 7, and then Kim has 2 sons. They are 13 and 10, and now she's remarried, so she has another son, Brendan, and he's also 12. So, we have 5 grandchildren, and I married Jerry in the year 2000 after we had dated for 15 years, and after our church gave us permission and said that they would bless our marriage. So we married each other, and I'm telling you, we just celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary on March 11th, and I am just so, so blessed, because now I know why it all happened. I know why this happened. It was like, why, God? I know I shouldn't question you, but why? I thought I was in love. I thought we had this wonderful family life. Well, not compared to what we have now, because he is so patient and so kind. And people say, does he work at the Blue Owl? And I say, well, he does, not really physically there, but he is our gopher. He goes for everything we forget. So he's going for everything all the time. He's our delivery person. He makes our deliveries all over St. Louis, which is where he is right now. He's making deliveries, and he had to go and get the Easter bunny costume. So he's just doing all kinds of things. But it was God's answer. And I didn't even know what I was praying for. But he truly showed me what marriage is. He showed me what love is. And it's just been an awesome experience, and our family is just so blessed. So I just want to thank you so much. I didn't even get to talk about the Food Network or anything. I want to, let's see. I just want to read this real quick. This is in the first cookbook, and we have 9, which is one of those other things, Who would ever think that I would write a cookbook? And then after I opened the restaurant, people were like, well, we want your recipes. And it was like, I don't know. And they're like, well, we want your recipes. Write a cookbook. Okay, I can do that. And here it is. And not 1, but 9. And we're supposed to do our 10th one this year. But I want to read this poem that was in our first book that I absolutely love. It says, it's my favorite recipe, to sift hard work and recreation with knowledge and experience, blend in enough faith, courage, and prayers to hold the ingredients together, sprinkle with laughter and smiles, tears and dreams may be added, whenever necessary, dissolve malice and hatred in a warm cup of love, understanding and forgiveness, and add to the first mixture. Pour into 24 hours of every day and serve it with enthusiasm. And that is my belief, and I just thank you so much for allowing me to share this with you. Thank you. And I welcome you all to come to the Blue Owl. I just want to show you right here the I hope it doesn't, okay. Big apple pie, 18 apples in every pie, hand-peeled, hand-sliced, it's still warm, with the caramel pecan topping that was featured on the Food Network. And our butterscotch pecan pie, which is a pecan pie filling with butterscotch morsels inside of it. It has over a pound of pecan halves placed on top of it. Can you see how they're placed? Each one special. And then we have our beautiful cherry lattice pie as well, and I don't want to pick it up because then these will fall. And these are just some of the pictures from being on the Food Network and being recognized worldwide, that we are so blessed that Paula Deen and her sons, Bobby and Jamie, came to the Blue Owl, and they featured us on their show first. They spent 5 hours at the Blue Owl filming Road Tasted, and that went, we thought, around the United States, but it went around the world. And I had 2 couples that were in Japan, and they said that when they were in Japan, they were from Jefferson County, and they were regular customers, and at different times, they were in Japan, and they were in their hotel rooms, and they were flipping through the TV stations. And there I was on the Japan television station making my apple pie. And I was like, I was dumbfounded, because at that point I didn't know it was worldwide. And my question to them was I talking Japanese? Because I couldn't imagine otherwise. But they were so awesome and so wonderful. And my younger daughter, Kelly, beautiful girl, absolutely beautiful, just got married last year. And she lives out in O'Fallon, which feels like 100 miles away. But that's my youngest daughter, Kelly, who is just a beautiful girl, too. Kimberly, right here, you've probably seen her if you've been to the Blue Owl. How many of you have been to the Blue Owl? All right, I love it. And if any of you haven't, I invite you to come. We're still open till 3 o'clock, and we will, even though you've eaten, we'll feed you again. And we're open tomorrow from 10 to 5. But I just welcome you all to come into our home and to experience what we have to offer you, because we do love all of you, and we want you to come and just feel really right at home with all of us. So thank you. And does anybody have questions? Yes?
Let's say it's not a holiday. You talked about the favorite recipes in your cookbook. Could you tell us your favorite, if you're having your favorite people or family members, your favorite summer menu, your favorite winter menu?
What do I make? What does my family love? Well, I will tell you this. My grandson Ryan is 10 years old, and he loves my roast beef. So he also loves, when he was younger, he loved bacon and eggs. So on Thanksgiving, and I will tell you this, they come with an appetite, but nothing else. They don't bring anything. All of them come, and they're ready to eat, and they want to know when it's going to be on the table, but nobody brings anything. And that's my fault, because I just love to cook, and I love to do it for them, and I love to have my family over. There's just nothing better than having all of our family together. And about 3 Thanksgivings ago, I think, too, I came home the night before Thanksgiving, and we make like 350 pies the day before Thanksgiving for people. And I came home that night, and it was about 8 o'clock, and I was so tired, and I still had to do all my prepping for Thanksgiving dinner. And I walk in, and I see in the dining room, the lights out, and I see in the dining room, it looks like there's all these chairs and stuff, and I'm like, what is that? And I look, and my daughter and my husband, Kim and my husband, had gone out, and for my Christmas present, bought me a table that would seat all 16 of us. The next year, I come home, and I'm tired, and I walk past, and I see all these plates, and I knew when I left that morning I hadn't set the table yet, and the table was set. And I go over there, and I turn on the light. She had gone to 5 different Kohl's stores, and I had mentioned that I saw these pumpkin plates that I thought were just darling. That's all I said. I mean, and I said, but they only had 3 of them left at that store. And I was just talking in passing. She went to 5 different stores all over St. Louis and bought a setting of 20 and put that all on the table with the placemats, the napkins, the serving pieces, everything to match, and had the table all set. And that was the best gift, having the table set for me. I didn't have to do that. That was a great gift. And so I make roast beef so many times, and then a lot of times my spinach artichoke dip, they have to have that. Brett was 4 years old, and he comes walking down the stairs. They always spend the night on Thanksgiving, the night before Thanksgiving, and Christmas Eve at our house, so they can wake up at Grandma's house for Christmas and Thanksgiving. He's 4 years old, little bitty guy, comes walking down the stairs. When I make spinach artichoke dip, I use, 9 pounds of cream cheese, a number 10 can of artichoke hearts, I can't tell you how much sour cream and Parmesan cheese and all of that, but that's what I do. And he comes walking down the stairs, and I've got this bowl this big made because I'm going to have it for the staff over the weekend and for us on Thanksgiving. And he comes walking down, and he says, "Thank you, Grandma, for my breakfast." And he picks up the bowl and starts walking away with it, you know. But I mean, I love to cook for my family. I really do. And my husband loves to barbecue for him too. So we just do things like that. I'll put out that great big Thanksgiving spread. And here's Ryan, who was younger, and he'd say, Where's my bacon and scrambled eggs? And I'd go, "Hold on just a minute." And then I'd get the eggs out and I'd fry the bacon, and he'd have bacon and scrambled eggs, and we'd all have a whole island full of other food. So I have definitely spoiled them, and I love doing that. I love doing it. And then I send them home. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Uh-huh.
I was trying to find out what the significance of the blue owl.
The Blue Owl was named by Mrs. Ross, and it was named after an English pub in Kensington, England. And actually, over the years, I have had a gentleman come into the restaurant that was a tour guide in England who says that there is a Blue Owl pub in Kensington, and he had been there many times. And so he took a picture of our staff and he posted it on their wall, and when he comes back, he's supposed to bring us a picture of their staff to post on our wall. So, and you know, Mrs. Ross was very particular back then. I mean, she just didn't know if I was going to make it or not, but until she started seeing all the lines of people. But, you know, when I first was getting ready to open, I met with her and I said, "Now, Mrs. Ross," I said, I thought of a lot of different names, you know, that I could call it, you know, because to me, the Blue Owl sounded like maybe it could have alcohol, but I wasn't going to have any liquor. So I wanted to name it something real cutesy. And I said, "So I've come up with several names." And she says, "For what?" And I went, "Oh, never mind. I think the Blue Owl sounds great as long as I can just say restaurant and bakery." She's like, "No problem." And then I said, "Mrs. Ross, I have some really cute material for the curtains." And she says, "For what?" And I went, "Oh, well, I was just going to change the curtains a little bit and everything." The material that you see in the Blue Owl right now, we have lace curtains from the Pioneer House, the lace shop in town, but also you see the blue onion material on the top of that. That is the original material from 25 years ago when I took over. Okay, so it had been there for 5 years prior to that. So 30 years old this material is. We hand wash that because it's very delicate. It could just disintegrate at any moment. But we made the valances out of that material so that we can continue to keep it there. She had provided that restaurant with old English china from England. It was the Johnson Brothers china, and so it was called Blue Onion, and it was very expensive. But when I first started, Mrs. Ross would come to me once a month and she would say, "I see all these people waiting in line. What do you need?" And she couldn't believe it. And she says, "What do you need?" And I said, "Well, you know, we need some more plates, and we need this, and we need that." She knew I didn't have the money. And she would say, "Okay, you go and get it, and you let me know what it cost." So for the first several months, she helped me with that. And it was just amazing what she did. In 1988, she came to me and she said, "You know, I think you need a new kitchen." She said, "I think you've outgrown this one." And actually, we had outgrown it on the second month, but I never said a word. I was thrilled to have it. And so she said, "I'm going to build you a new kitchen." And she said, "And I'll add on more dining space if you need it." So she added on another dining room, and I called it the Texas Tea Room after our home state of Texas. And then she built a deck. And so then every time she did a project, she would ask if I could buy the building, because then it would be in my name. It was the first property she sold to anyone. And I never could do it until finally 1991 I started proceedings to be able to buy and purchase the building over the years. And so I did do that so that it was out of her hands and she didn't have to worry about it. But she was just instrumental in my life. Thank you so much, and I wish you all a very blessed Easter. Thank you so much. Thank you.